Alright, we're tearing this thing down. It's the slave cylinder, release bearing. Got a new one of these. Just comes off like that. Probably didn't need to replace this, but I always replace them whenever I have the transmission out. They're not that expensive. So we're going to take the shifter mechanism off. These have thread sealer on them, as you can see. So they go into the transmission body. If you don't seal them, they will leak. Alright, so taking the selector mechanism out. If you ever wonder why the top of your transmission is orange, that is because the battery box on top is rusting. And that is rust water dripping down onto the transmission. So now we're just going to make sure it's in neutral. Soft flow. And there's the shifter mechanism. So our mosquitoes are terrible at our house right now. So that's the shifter mechanism. Doesn't look damaged at all. That's good. Wasn't expecting this to be damaged. These things are pretty stout. Make sure you keep track of that. That is an alignment dowel. Alright, so you see here, this hole right here goes inside the case of the transmission. This one and this one, they both do. So that's why you need thread sealer, so that your transmission doesn't leak. So one of the things I'll be doing is cleaning all this off. This is just some brake fluid from when I put took this out, the clutch line here. Just put brake fluid over everything, so it's not that big of a deal. So if you want to look down in here, when you can tell this is in neutral, this thing's not light, is all those all those shifter forks will be in a line. And it'll kind of make like it looks like a candle. That's how you know you're in neutral. Oh yeah, I definitely see some damage. To one of the forks. Actually, two of the forks. Yeah, first and second gear forks. First, second, third, and fourth. They all have some damage to them. I'm going to take this apart. And then I'll come back to show you what I find. This is going to take me a second to pull this all apart, and I don't want to waste time doing that, so I'll bring you back. It's pretty straightforward. You just take all the case bolts out and separate it, and I'll bring you back when I have this I'll have this turned over, and so we can see a lot better what I'm seeing. Opened up, and it's kind of what I suspected. So first and second shift forks, it's actually pretty good. See how it doesn't wiggle. When I opened it up, I found, this white material here, which that is shift fork material. And wouldn't you know, it's missing completely. That should not do that. See over here, you can see right there, that white stuff. That's there still. It is missing over there. So that'd be why my 3-4 shifts are kind of feel like they're binding because it's making this, see how it twists a little bit? It's making, when I go to shift, instead of going up and down smoothly, it's kind of cocked a little bit like that. So luckily I got those shift forks, because now I can fix that. All right, I gotta tear this down further, but that's what I expected to find. All right, here's the 5/6 reverse. I didn't show you guys on the 1 through 4 gear cluster and how to get these off. You really need an impact to get these off. The reverse thread, there is thread locker on them. If you don't have an impact, you're gonna have to have someone with a strap wrench hold really tightly to break this loose, and maybe even put some heat on it. But if you have impact, make sure you're on forward because it's reverse thread. I'm going to hold it with a towel. I'm going to put it in a gear. Now push it way down in there. Whoa. Oh, it popped out. I'll put it up there. I'll put it in reverse. And that's how you get it up. There's a bunch of junk in there. That's the thread locker. You can take the old bolt and flute it, just cut it in four quadrants, like I did with this one, and that basically just acts as a chase. And you can just screw it in here. I'll show you all the junk it gets out. Reverse thread. All those flutes to do is make a sharp edge and a place for the trash to go. You see now there's a bunch of junk in there that came out. And you want to get that out because you're putting a new one in there. You want that thread locker, the new thread locker, to seat properly. Next thing I do is cut that cage off. These are just plastic, so snip with some pliers like that. Cage breaks. Out come all the roller bearings. Okay. Next, we need to get this off. And you have this tool. It's just a bearing puller. Going to take your old bolt, put it in here a little bit, because you're going to be pressing on it. And I like to put that on there because if you see, I use this on the other one, and it made a little divot there in the center. I don't want to get my tool stuck in this. This set up. It's just underneath the bearing. This is the one from the other. So there's a lip right here that you can catch. Cut the cage off, and now we can catch on to that. As far as I know, I don't think there's any way to get this off without destroying it. And then we just tighten ever so gently. hear it pop. Popping means it's moving. It should just get easier and easier. That first pop is the hardest. Alright, so now still have those bolts in there. I'm going to take this off. I'll loosen this up. Take this reverse thread out. Now I'm going to put just a bigger bolt down in there that fits in between right there, so that way the bearing race can continue to be pulled out. Otherwise it would just hit that flange. Alright, so now it should come out pretty easy. And there it is. So now I should be able to just take off 6th gear. And then there's only one blocker ring in here. This one's brass. And you can see here, there's these lines in here. Those are just a bunch of little sharp grooves that are meant to push. They push the oil out of the way so that it can then grab onto the cone of this gear. So you're gonna push down on the gear, it locks. Otherwise, when there's no pressure on it, it can spin because it's riding on oil. But when you move the slider, it pushes it, and it should line these up, and the slider can then roll over onto the dog teeth of the gear. These blocker rings are just meant to speed up and slow down the gear. They're synchronizers. They make the input and output speeds the same, so you can shift the transmission. So now there's a C-clip in here as well, same one that's on 3.4, so that needs to come off to get this hub off, and then there's just 2 Synchros right here and that's it, and then this one will be ready to be put back together. So here we are back. Taking the 1.4 gear cluster out. I already have the top bearing off of it. This is just a plastic cage, so you can just snip this, and then all your rollers will fall out. Get those out of the way. This is going to be up here. This bolt here is reverse thread. It's kind of in there. It's Loctite in there, so it will be hard to get out. If you have a really strong impact, that will get it out. It helps to put both of these in gear, so now you got these gears to hold on to, and then a person can just hold on to it with a rag like this and then spin the bolt out. You notice here I've cut flutes in this bolt. You can't reuse these, so you have to get new ones, and I cleaned up the threads and I cut these flutes to clean out the remainder of the thread locker compound in there. To get this bearing off, you just need this special tool. This is just a bearing puller. So once you get the cage off, you can put this around it. on the top like this. There's a hole through the center, so you're just going to put this bolt back in there to push on the center of that. And then, you know, just tighten this down. This is just a forcing screw. This goes down, pushes on this, and then it'll pull this up. So really super easy. I think it's like 60 bucks. You probably get them at Harbor Freight cheaper. Once that races, you know, it's destroyed. You need a new bearing for that. And then this is fourth gear. Fourth gear will just come right off. Make sure you keep these in order. There's a caged bearing. Put that back inside fourth gear. Don't get anything inside of it. This is the 3/4 Synchro. Inside here are the Synchronizers. These are the rings that speed up and slow down the gear. They're basically just cones. And these are the stock ones. There's rings in there to cut through the oil. They cut through the oil and they grip on. See how they get stuck and it grips on. This synchronizer then can speed up or slow down the gear to match the the speed of the engine to the road. And there's these dog teeth all around here. These have to be pointed to help smooth out the shifts. You'll see here when I get down to second gear is kind of pretty rolled over. You know, it's no longer a sharp point like that on the dog teeth. It's more like a rolled over like this. So I've got a new second gear here, and I also have a new second 1-2 slider, along with all new synchronizers. Hardest thing you're gonna have with this thing here are the snap rings. They are a pain in the ass. You need to have pliers like these. I think I got these at Advanced Auto. So they're pretty common. I've ground out the tips a little bit just to get rid of the paint, because if you see it's knurled, and that's so you can grab onto the snap ring in here. Get yourself a small screwdriver like this. And maybe even where'd that go? A dental pick can help, or 2 small screwdrivers. Make sure you have a nice working area that's well lit, because this is, you know, the most sensitive of the work. So when you're pressing these in, you're kind of going to be pulling them apart while pressing in, and do not be discouraged if it takes you a while to get this off. My trick is to kind of load it and then get this in here underneath it, and then I can get it off like that. These are one-time use. Make sure you get a new one for the first 2 Synchro, and the 3/4 Synchro, and the 5/6 Synchro. I think the 5/6 and 3/4 are the same ones. I got them here in this nice little Ziploc bag. You see these 2 are the same, and this one it's like a darker, I believe it has some type of copper in it because it acts as a thrust washer. Next, you can pull off the 3/4 Synchro. I suggest you number these. So I've numbered 4 on one side and 3 on the other, because these do have a direction to them, and these aren't pressed on too hard. So you want to grab the whole Synchro to pull up, because of these 3 things here. These have spring-loaded balls in them, so make sure you get those on. It comes up as one. If they do fall, it's not a big deal. Just put them in the right orientation. As you see, there's like little castles that line up with the gear around here. I can even show you what happens when they fall apart. I mean, that's it. This is splined in a certain way. There is only one way that this goes on. Make sure that you keep this orientated the correct way. I think this can go either way, but you know, it's just nice to keep things in the same way. So you see here, there's that ball. This is that keeps tension on the slider, and that's that feeling that you part of the feeling that you feel when you lock into the gear. And you see here it has like kind of like gear teeth cut out. So here we are. The little tension balls are out. It's actually easier just to go in from the top. You push from the side and push them down in there, and they should just kind of snap in. There's a little groove down in there for them. And then you'll hear it once they lock in. There you go. That's how you put that back together. 3/4 Synchro slider stays together a lot easier than the 1/2. So we'll put that over to the side. Next is third gear. Here's the synchronizers. And these are brass. We're going to be replacing all these with the carbon fiber upgraded Synchros. 3/4 Synchro are the same. This one, so this gear freewheels, so it's just going to slide right off. Here's another caged roller bearing. Put that with its gear. There's going to be a split washer here. There's a ring. This ring goes on top. It has a lip right here so it can sit on top of the split washer. The split washer only goes on one way. It also acts as a thrust bearing. It is notched. So we can put that over here. Now this is second gear. Second gear will just lift right off. It has a caged bearing as well. And I don't know if you're going to be able to see it on camera, but these teeth right here, a lot of them are just rolled over. Some of them are mangled pretty bad. It's not uncommon. Second gear takes a pretty big beating coming out of first gear in these transmissions, especially if you break loose in first and you just bang it into second. The upgraded Synchro should help with that, because the reason why this is happening is you're going to shift into second at high RPM, and the Synchronizer just can't speed up the gear fast enough to line up the teeth here with the slider. The slider right here is the thing that locks it to the shaft that then transmits your power to the differential. Underneath this gear is your second gear synchronizer, and this is this has, I think this is like some kind of brass material. These all lock together in a certain fashion. When I put this back together, I'll show you how to do that. It is you have to put these back so they're locking together like that, and there's locks. You see it here in the second gear. There's these notches, and they all have to fit into their holes. I guess the best way to put that. You see how that one hooks onto there, and then there's 3 tabs here, 1, 2, 3 here, and then on the hub of the slider there are 3 notches that those go into. And when all those line up, then all your snap ring grooves will line up as well. So that's one of the ways that you can make sure you're putting this back together correctly. Is if your snap ring grooves don't line up, that means you got something out of order. So we're going to take this second gear, put it out of the way. Don't forget your cage roller bearing. And now we come to another snap ring. And this one is a little bit trickier. So same snap ring pliers. What I find, so there's some oil passages in here, and when you get this part, you can kind of see it. There's a little dip right here, and there's 3 of them, and that's so you can get oil down in there. And what that will do is, you can see you can get a screwdriver on there. That can really help in getting this apart. So you want to push in, keeping tension, and this in the first go. Nope, ground. See here, so I can maybe get underneath it right here. Nope. So go. I got it. Oh, come on. There we go. Don't get frustrated. It might take you a while. Two slider. This one is a little bit tighter to the shaft. There's no way around it. You can't. You're not gonna be able to get it off with the slider. So just take it off. It is directional as well. You can see there is a larger flange here. Make sure you pay attention to that. If you look at the factory service manual, it will show you the orientation of these. Again, also mark your hubs. I got this marked with a 2 to show that that is towards second gear. You see I can't pull it up, but what you do is you flip it over. Do this on wood. This is a wood bench. And it'll break loose like that. And then there you go. You got your 1-2 hub slider off. And then now you have first gear. No reason to take first gear off, because we do not need to go any further than that. But here is first gear synchronizer. This is the same as second gear synchronizer. They are all interchangeable. So the interesting thing about these is that one of these, the 3 tabs in the middle are raised, which is different than the synchronizers that replacement synchronizers I got. I'm going to look and see if that is going to be an actual issue. I don't think it will be. I think it's just only for alignment for when you go back together. If you look at these, they're completely flush, these 3 right here. They lock into, if you see here, there are 3 windows. They lock in there. I think the only reason why they are raised like that is for when you're pushing this back on, you have a window to line those up, and you can see that raised tab. It goes in there a lot sooner, so there's less room for error. So we will see what that is all about. To get your little ball bearings in there, it's too difficult to put the slider back together when it's off the shaft. You have to do it when it's on the shaft. When I'm reassembling this, I can show you guys that. But that's how you break down this shaft. And next, I'll show you how to reassemble it with new synchronizers. Okay, so now I'm going to rebuild the 1-4 gear cluster. I took this. I took the first and reverse gear off. I cleaned it all. I used kerosene and some WD-40 just to clean them all up. Then I cleaned it off with brake parts cleaner and then re-lubed it with transmission fluid. So it's already lubed all back up. So I can get everything nice and clean. I mean, you don't have to do that, but I'm going to take the extra step to ensure that this transmission lasts a long time. So next thing I'm going to get the first gear Synchro and put that on. And then I'm going to, rather than hammer on the this 1-2 hub, I'm going to press it on. So the way I'm going to do that is I just have a piece of 2 1/4 tailpipe. I'm going to put it over here and then press it down. I got a hand operated, small press that I think I got from Harbor Freight years ago. So that should be fine. The thing that you have to be very careful with is you have to line up everything when you start pressing. These 3 holes here have to line up with the synchronizer rings, and there's holes around here, 6 of them here, that have to line up. And if you don't get those lined up, you could bend something. So let me go get the first and second gear Synchro. So I've had these sitting in oil overnight. So you see here, these 6 lugs here will correspond to these 6 here. These 6 lugs here will lock in to this ring here, like that. These 3 will lock into these 3. So you have to keep all lined up when you're pressing, hammering, whatever. Just do it a little bit at a time. Make sure everything still spins, because you don't want to bend these. I did look up, these 3 tabs here are flat, and this is just a revised one from this one. You see here is the old blocker ring. These have raised edges. If you're doing the Synchro replacement, they have you reuse your old one, which is fine as long as there's like no excessive damage on it. I got a new second gear, and I also got a new 1-2 slider, and it came with new Synchros. So I'm just gonna use the new sleeve, or this new ring here. So first you're gonna put on this ring, slide it over like that. Next you're gonna do this middle one, and you're gonna make sure it locks into place there, so you should be able to turn the gear like that. This one should be able to slightly turn freely. And the job of the synchronizer is to pinch together and speed up and slow down the gear so that it can match the speed of the engine. Then we're going to put this one on. And you just have to turn it until it drops in, just like that. So now that's in place correctly. So now I'm going to pause this for a second. I'm going to go get set up on the press so that we can press this in. The cool thing is that this still can be, brought up. So probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring, when I'm pressing, I'm going to lock this in place and press, and let my hand hold this and push it down as I, get it in place. That way, these 3 holes will stay lined up. And actually, on the new 1-2 slider, they got rid of these holes, probably because it's a new revised part. So let me get set up on the press, and be right back. Okay, so here we are on my press. So I have it supported down here with this block. I also have no weight on this bearing. I have a little circular disc here from a seal driving kit up here. And then I have another one up here to press on. And then I just have this piece of exhaust tubing. So you need to make sure that this goes in correctly. Otherwise you'll get binding. So I have if you bring this gear up and you spin it, you should eventually stop and lock in like that. We'll see now it's locked in. That means you're safe to press, but keep pressing slowly, just to make sure that you don't have anything in the way. And this is not a press fit. That's why you can hit it on with a hammer. I am just doing it with a press because it is easier when you have the tool. So now I let the gear drop down. And you can see the gear spins freely now, but this ring right here is clicking because it is locked in the hub. You see I still have some play in there. That means I'm not pressed down all the way. I think I got it. It should still spin freely because this is what it's doing in the transmission. This gear is freewheeling unless you're locked in with the sleeve. This hub here is bidirectional. It should be able to go up or down. I put it back on the way that I took the other one out. There's writing on the opposite side of this. It's pretty simple to see. There's also some what looks like balancing marks, I believe, drilled into there. So I took it out with those facing down. So I'm putting a new one in with those facing down. I think we're there. Feel a little bit. I'm gonna just push on a little bit more, and that feels good. So this is what I used. 42 means 42 millimeters. So here we go. Still freely spins. Should hear that slight drag. That's from the Synchronizer, the new one. But you want that clicking to happen. That's the those tabs rocking around back and forth in this hub. And the other thing you need to be mindful of is where your C-clip goes, or not your C-clip. There's a little groove for it right there. You should be able to get that in. If you can't, that means you haven't seated the hub down all the way. So here we are back on the bench. If you go to the factory service manual, this will show you the way these synchronizers are supposed to face, both the outside slider and the inside hub. You see here it's just like an eye. Most importantly, you want to look at this one. This one is definitely directional. This hub is definitely directional. This one doesn't look directional, but I put it back in the same way that it came out. This one, very hard to notice, but it is directional. You can see there's a little notch right there at the top. I don't know what that notch is for, but I'm going to put it back in that way. So right now we're on the first and second gear slider. We have the hub on. We know that we got it in there right. This is the snap ring, the old one. You can take it, you can put it in all the way around. You know, there's the space for it is there. So I know that I am in the groove, or I'm in position. So I'm gonna set that old snap ring aside. Getting the new snap ring out. First, second gear snap ring is bigger in diameter than 3, 4, and 5, 6. Trusty snap ring pliers. These snap rings are a pain in the ass, but going on, they are easier to get on than off. Just gonna have to expand them quite a bit, holding the back of it with your hand. And there we go. Get fully seated. It's in there. One of the things you can do is just take a screwdriver that you can hammer on. You know, make sure that it's in there. That is in there. Again, check to make sure this moves. This should move freely. The top ring should click. When when this all goes back together and is functioning, what's happening is the slider is going to push down and it's going to push on this ring here. You see it slides freely, but if I add a little tension to it, it locks. And when you shift your gear, that's what you're locking onto. And then if you move the slider out, now it freewheels again. And that's just locking the output shaft, or the input shaft, which comes through this gear, and locks it to here, which is the output shaft. And then this is connected to the differential. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is reassemble this slider. Remember, this fat lip goes down towards first gear. These are splined in a certain way that you can't mess up the splining. Like once it's there, it only goes on one way. And now it's locked in. So you should feel that it is locked in. But you see it's falling down freely. That's because we don't have the little ball bearings in there to hold it in place. Now I've been soaking all these in the transmission fluid. I don't want to have a dry startup. So these go in, you see, like that. So they don't go in like this. That's no. Go in like that. Yeah, there's 3 of them. Remember, flange, or this large flange side goes down. So we got the slider ring back on, hubs on, snap rings on. Do not forget the snap ring, bad things will happen. Got the ball tensioners in there. You see it still moves very freely. You can hear it, that's fine. When this thing is being flushed with oil while it's driving, that's gonna be lubricated. These things work on very tight tolerances so that when you apply pressure downward with the shift fork, it's going to grab onto that gear right away, spin it up or slow it down depending on what needs to happen. These synchronizers are supposed to be better because they'll grab onto the gear a lot quicker and harder than the OEM ones do. And when you're shifting at high RPM, and if you're at say 6,000 RPM, and you go to shift to your next gear, you have to drop down a few RPM, like 500 RPM or something like that. So that means that this synchronizer's job when you upshift is to slow down the gear that it's going into. So it has to slow down the gear, it has to slow down the input shaft and the clutch disc, because you're pressing the clutch in when you do that. It has to slow all that down, all that mass down. These little rings, that's their job, and these OEM ones kind of suck at it. Well, they don't suck at it if you're going at slow speeds, but the Focus ST is a sport car, so you'd expect to do some quick shifts. So now that I have this, I'm going to get the second gear synchro, which is the same as the first gear synchro. Once again, I've been having these sitting in oil. So now you're going to put this ring on first. It's going to drop down into those 3 lugs. Next, you'll put on the center one. Oops, sorry, I did that wrong. You're going to put on this center one, which won't be splined to anything, because this one is going to go on second gear. And then this one will lock into the ring, the outside ring. And that's what it should look like. It should be clicking like that. So now you have 6 lugs here. These lugs will be going into the second gear. So let's see, we want to put on the second gear cage bearing. Again, I'm using a new second gear because my dog teeth have been rounded over. So I'm going to lube this up real quick. That's just been freely. Here's the new second gear. There are 6 holes here, square holes, that will correspond to these lugs right there. And all you gotta do is turn it until it drops in. Now you should be able to test shift this now without it falling apart. Bottom one should freewheel. Hold second gear while you shift down. These will shift kind of hard because they like to be spinning, you know, when they're shifting. Now don't be alarmed if you can't move it still. These synchronizers can get wedged together when you're putting them together. It's not a big deal. See, they're supposed to spin like that. But remember, the transmission doesn't lay like this. It lays this way. So we have the weight of second gear down on this, pushing on these synchronizers. So if you tip it like this, it might help. There we go. And it's spinning freely. Now we're going to put it back in neutral. And now both these spin freely. The next thing to do is to put on the split washer. This only goes on one way. Kind of have to search around for the flat spot. There it is. So now that's going to hold this all together. And you have your locking ring. There is a little lip in here that just fits down there like that. So now that is a completed 1-2 gear set. Okay, so now we're going to put third and fourth gear on, and of course the 3/4 slider in the middle. The things to note about this one, make sure that you orientate it in the correct way, as always. Wiping off some dust got on it. Go back to your diagram here. This is the 3/4 hub. The notch goes towards third gear. The bigger notch, smaller notch, goes towards fourth gear. Here's the slider. Looks about the same. There is a little groove right there, and I can attest to you that that groove is there in the slider. Not sure what it's for, but we're going to put it that way. Okay, so let's put the cage bearing on for third gear. And now third gear. These 4 holes go up towards the slider. And that should freewheel nicely. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is put the synchronizer on. And again, I've been having these soaked in oil. These 4 lugs will correspond to 4 lugs on one of the rings. Now these Synchros are brass, but they still are carbon fiber lined. So we're going to put this one on first. This one looks like a castle. There's 6 lugs here. Next is going to be this one. These 4 lugs correspond to the 4 in the gear. And make sure they're all in like that. You don't have to push them in. That's part of the thing that happens is this one has to be able to freewheel. This one has, again, 3 for the slider hub, and then there's 3 for the center ring. So all I gotta do is let it sit in there. Actually, sorry, they are all for the center ring. The slider actually uses the outside plugs. Okay, so next thing, I'm gonna get the 3/4 hub. Here it is. You see the bigger flanges on the 3rd gear side, shallower one on 4th gear. This one should just slide right on, and then you want to turn your gear, and then it'll fall right in like that. Now you should hear that clicking. That's what that is. And everything still turns very nicely. So the next thing to do is to put on the 3/4 snap ring. And you should use a new one. Highly recommend it, because these stretch out. And they're only $5, so well worth the investment. So if I see here, right now it does fit in the groove, and I should have no problems getting it in. Just re-verifying that I have the correct side. Small side up towards 4th. And time to put the snap ring on. This one should go on a lot easier than the 1/2. 1/2 is the hardest. And that snap was its seating. So that is not coming out right now. So this whole thing, is stuck together now. Okay, so now time for the slider. So here's the slider and the tension rings, tension balls. So it might be hard to see this on camera, but there's a line on this one. There's not one on this one. According to our documentation, this line, this ring around here goes facing up towards 4th gear. With this one, you can just drop in like so. And these have these only go in one way. They're splined to the shaft, or the slider. So you should be able to just snap them in. These are a lot easier than 1/2. But they will still explode if you move the slider. There we go. Don't move it up. You can check for engagement going down. And that feels good. Now, coming up, it might explode. Okay, it did not. Good. Everything still moves freely. Now it's time for 4th gear. Okay, so now we're going to put 4th gear on. So I already have this one sitting in here. So with this one, assemble it, sure it's together, and then you can just line this one up and drop it right in. So that click means it's in. The center ring spins freely, which will be attached to the gear. Snap ring is on. Double check that you have that snap ring in there. You do not want to forget that. Okay, so next we'll get the cage bearing in the gear. Cage bearing goes on first. Gear has 4 lugs right around here. And then that dropping in and clicking means it is seated. So now this is in neutral. Everything spins freely. The next thing to do is to press this top bearing on. I'm going to do that with the press. And then after that, you just need to put on the reverse thread bolt. Okay, here we are at the press. Got it started a little bit. I'm using another one of these seal drivers. I have the old race here. This is the new bearing. It's metal caged. You see here, this can move freely. That means there's no pressure on it. You do not want to put pressure on these because it could explode. Same thing as the bottom one down here. No pressure on it. You don't want to push directly on this. You want to space it off right on the shaft of the output shaft. So now we're just going to press. Making sure everything still turns. Just go slowly. It should bottom out. Everything should still turn freely. And when you're done, this top of this, so this is the old one, this part right here will be flush with the shaft. Because then that reverse thread bolt sits right on top of that. And that's it. That's the complete 1/4 gear set. So I forgot to mention, I still have to put the bolt in. I'm going to do that off camera because I need another person to hold this. This bolt up here is 75 foot-pounds or 100 Newton meters, depending on what country you're in. 100 Newton meters, 75 foot-pounds is pretty close. I think 100 Newton meters is like 73.5 foot-pounds. But torque is not an exact science. Just get you there. All right, I'm going to put that bolt in. Now this is all set to go back in the transmission, but what we're going to do next is set the preload. Because we replaced this bearing, the preload shim might need to be changed. I'm going to measure it. I'll show you guys how to do that. I personally believe that anytime you change one of these bearings, top or bottom, that you should remeasure preload. It takes some specialty tools, but it does prolong the life of the transmission. Okay, everyone. We have the 5/6 in reverse gear cluster in here, and we're going to be measuring end play. I have a measuring shim here of 1.10 millimeters. The one I took out of there, I'll tell you in a second. So up here, I just made a fixture here so I can put my magnetic base on it. And then I have my dial indicator up here, and I'm going through one of the holes of the input shaft. And then I bought these extensions down here that allow me to extend the pointer of the dial indicator. So it goes from here all the way down here. So if you look inside here, I have it resting here on the reverse gear, I think that is. And I got a 30 millimeter flat pointer so that it gets good engagement on that reverse gear. So what this is going to do is I'm going to use a pry bar, and I'm going to push up right underneath the plunger. It's going to shove it upwards, it's going to then measure our dial indicator up here. And we're going to do that in 3 different spots, and that'll give us our end play. Then we add that to the measuring shim, 1.10 millimeters, and then you add your preload to that, and that'll give you your bearing preload for 5/6/7 or 5/6 reverse gear cluster. It's going to be somewhat similar to the 1 through 4 gear cluster. I don't have that one ready yet, so when I get that one ready, I'll show you how to do that as well. Here we go. We're taking the first measurement. I'm looking at my dial indicator, and I'm pressing up on the reverse gear, and I'm getting 25 thousandths. So now I'm going to lift up on this to relieve the tension, and I'm going to move the reverse gear a little bit. I want to make sure that this is free travel. Sometimes I shake the case just to find a resting spot. This one's resting at 1,000, so I'm going to add that to whatever I get. Or subtract it, sorry. Getting 26 thousandths. So now I'm going to move it again. It's resting about 0.5 thousandths. So we're about 26.5. So now I'm going to add all those 3 together, average them out. Okay, so these are the measurements we did. These are in inches. So to add them together, divide by 3 to get the average, which is right here. Then I converted it to millimeter. So that's the free distance in there, the end play. There is a 1.10 millimeter shim currently installed in there. And according to factory standards, to add the preload, you need to add 0.15 millimeter for preload. Now here's my addition equation. 0.655 plus 1.10. That takes up the total distance inside the case. And then you're going to add a 0.15 millimeter preload to it, which essentially adds a wedge effect to the bearing. So you're putting a lot of pressure on, pre-pressure on that bearing, and that'll equal 1.905 millimeters of shim distance that you need to put in there. I only have a bunch of shims. I don't have that size shim, so I'm just going to go to, I have them in 0.05 millimeter increments. So I'm just going to go with 1.9 millimeter. 0.005 millimeter is really small, so I'm not going to worry about that. So I'm just going to go with 1.9 millimeter shim, and that will be the proper preload on the 5/6 reverse gear cluster. Now we just got to do the same thing to 1 through 4 gear cluster. Alright, so here's the bearing races that are in the non-bell housing part of the transmission. These 2 have to be replaced down here for the bearings that we put on the shafts. So I have a heat gun here. You need to use a heat gun to just warm up the metal. And if you get it warm enough, these bearings will just pretty much fall out. What you will need to take this out, though, is a pilot bearing tool. So it's right here. And you're also going to use this to take the bearing races out of the other side of the case to get the preload shim set. Sorry about the sound. There's nothing I can do about that. I'll show you this. But you see, these aren't very difficult to get out or put in if you warm them up enough. I think that's enough. can't turn that off because it's going to go into, still going to cool itself. Now it's locked in now. So I can hold the case while you knock this out. And there you go. So now to get the new one in, we're going to use a seal driver. These bearing races do not go flush with the case. There is a step down there so that oil can get out. I'm going to heat up the case again. Sometimes if you get these hot enough, they'll just drop right in. This is the same process that's used to do the differential bearings as well. This is not fun on a hot day. You can hear the sound change when it's seated. And that's it. Those are installed. Alright, so here we are again. The first time I did this was with the old bearings, and that did exactly what I thought it did. The preload was a lot less from the worn bearings. The shim that I took out of here was a 1.71 millimeter shim. And if you remember the preload that I measured on the worn bearings, it was 1.88. So there was an amount of wear that happened from those old bearings, and I wanted to see what it was prior to disassembling it, just to see how much it wore. So now in this setup I have the new bearing put in, new races. I cleaned the mating surface around here, so that's completely fat. I put in about 10 bolts around the case, torqued those. So that's clamped. I shortened the dial indicator rod so I don't give so I get more accuracy there. And I put a piece of wood under here so that I can hold it so that there's no deflection with measuring this. So we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to do 3 times, and we're going to average them. And we're going to see what we get. First time I got about 19 thousandths. Again, we're going to convert this to metric. I'm just in there, I'm moving the reverse gear to a different spot so we can get an average of the free play. And the reason why I'm moving this up and down is I just want to see where its natural resting spot is. That way I know that I'm at a true starting spot. I'm getting some weird stuff happening. There you go, that looks better. So I'm at 18 thousandths, so it's 1918. 18. All right, so we got 19, 18, and 18. So we're going to average those out, and then come back and let you know what that is. Okay, so did the math, and it comes out to 1.716. So this is 5th, 6th reverse gear output shaft, and these are examples here, but this is the what you want to concentrate on. This 0.15. That's the what you want to add to the end play. So with that added, that gives us 1.716. The OEM shim that I took out of there that came from the factory was 1.71. So I don't even need to put a new shim in there. I'm just going for the, this is for the 5/6 reverse shaft. I'm just going to reuse the one that came with the transmission. Still have to measure the 1, 2, 3, 4 output shaft. So we're going to find out if that is the same as well. All right, so here I got the top of the transmission off. Remember this little tube here, which I think is just for collecting oil and getting on the bearings, goes down here. You can't take this out unless you take this race out. So obviously I already have it out because I've already had taken this race out, and I left it out so that I can, I won't break it accidentally, because I can't find these anywhere, and pretty sure they're important for the transmission. So I'm going to show you how to take this out, because with this here, sitting there like that, it's going to be down a little bit, but it's really hard to get around here to pull this out, because typically, what you would do is use a puller that would sit here. Now, if you had a really tall puller that could sit up here, be pretty easy. But then again, you would need some type of forcing thing to come down through here, through the center, and then I wouldn't feel comfortable pushing on the case right there. So imagine this is here when I do this, because I don't want to have to reinstall it and then take it out one more time just to show you. So just pretend that's there. I'm going to put that in a safe spot. You're going to need a heat gun again, and you'll definitely need a pilot bearing puller. And what I do is I heat it up, and then I only use one side of this, and I hook it underneath where the oil comes in. And I just, tap on one side or twice, tap on the other side a few times, and then I just keep on, going back and forth. And you can fit this in here just fine. Sometimes I'll hold it like this. You can fit this in here just fine when that funnel is in there. And I might be able to even get this out without heating it, because these aren't pressed in there that hard. Yeah, it's coming out. Don't really want to heat up the case too much right now, because that could mess with my end play. This will take a little bit longer. I mean, I could expand this and do it from both sides, but I want to show you how this is done, because this is one of the harder ones. And then there, it pops right out. And then underneath there is your shim. So this is the measuring shim. This is 1.10 millimeters. I'm going to put that one back. Put that over here. Actually, I'm going to put this on the 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to take this. I'm going to set that aside. And then I'm going to install this race. This is for the 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, you don't typically need heat with this either, though it does help. I'm going to not use heat so I don't affect my clearances. Again, you just go slow. And then once you get it close, use a punch. You want to be very careful. You don't want this to jump off. And you can hear it change tone when it's fully seated. Kind of goes a little bit higher pitched. So the reason why I did that and I left out the funnel is because I'm going to be putting this gear set over here in it to measure the end play on that to see what the preload shim needs to be. So now that I got that in, I'm going to get that gear set in. I'm going to assemble it all back together, torque some bolts down, and then we'll measure this and see what that's at. Okay, so I have it set up for 1, 2, 3, 4 output shaft. Pretty much the same setup. You're going to be going through the same hole. You're going to use a lot shorter rod on your dial indicator. I think I use the 3-inch rod adapter plus the wide base. And then I have it resting on 3rd gear in here. So if we zoom in here, you can see it up there, right there. So that's the wide base that I can get on the gear and get the measurement. So now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pry on the gears at the bottom. I'm going to pry up. So I'm going to hold this, make sure I don't get any vibrations. Make sure I got movement. First one's 17 thousandths. Now I'm going to lift up on the plunger or the wide base a little bit. I'm going to move the gear. Always make sure you have free movement. Here we go again. 17 thousandths. Zeroing, and last time. Same number, 17 thousandths. Okay, so now I'm going to add those together, get the average, which is probably 17 thousandths. I'm going to convert it to metric, and then I'm going to see what size shim I have, and then once I figure that out, I'll let you know what the OEM shim that came out of here is. And then we can go from there and see if I actually needed to reshim this based off of, you know, what we found. So give me a second. Okay, so here we are. The shim size that it says I should use is 1.70 based on you know, averaging them out and adding the measurement shim, which is 1.10, and then on 1st through 4th you add 0.17 preload. Based off the end play, and that's what gave me the 1.70. Over here is the OEM shim. You see it measures at 1.734. Now the shim sizes I have are 1.70 or 1.75. I'm just going to stick the OEM shim back in there because 0.04 more or less is, you know, basically very small gap. So, you know, this is my transmission. I wish I had more to test like this to tell if you actually do need to change these shims when you know, take the bearings off the output shafts. Everything I read about it says anytime you replace bearings, you should always reshim. But maybe I just got lucky and I get to reuse the shims that came with my transmission. You know, it's up to you on what you want to do. If you reuse your shims, you know, it could be right, could be wrong, could be, you know, too tight. So, all right, I'm gonna put it back together. All right, so I got the transmission apart. Now I'm gonna do the final assembly, putting the OEM shims back in because the measurement came out, you know, that the OEM shims will work. So I'm just heating the aluminum to expand it, to drop these steel outer races in. And I'm going to put the funnels back in now. So I'm just getting this fairly warm. So here's the shim. The funnel goes on top of that. And then the race goes on top of that. And you'll notice that tone change, and make this fully seated. So now I'm going to do the 1, 2, 3, 4. So give me a little bit. Alright, this one's close to being warmed up. So the funnel goes in first, then the shim, then the ritz. I'm just walking it in. When you hear that tone change, that means it's in. There you go. Here is everything back in order before I seal it up. If you look through the window here, you'll see that everything lines up. So that means it's in neutral right now. Shift rails are in. Should be able to move them like a little bit like that. That means they're lined up correctly. Don't forget to put your little support piece here on the shift rail. I'm going to pause the video here for a second and show you this picture. In the video, you'll see that the bearing retainer is on the wrong shift rail. In the video, the bearing retainer is on the 5-6 shift rail, and it should be on the 1, 2, 3, 4 shift rail. If you have this on the wrong shift rail, the case will not go together. This was kind of a pain to get in. The way that I did it is I went to the other side of the case and I put these two shafts in and the differential in on the bell housing side, closed it back up, flipped it, and then I was able to put the input shaft in. It was a lot easier than trying to basically put all these in at the same time. But the reason why I wanted to do it this way is because putting these shift rails in is easier on the bell housing side like this. But now everything shifts okay. That's reverse. This is 6 and 5th. Might be hard to shift up because there's nothing holding there. But let's give first and second a try. First and second. So now it's in first. If I hold down on it, problem is these aren't spinning. I like to move. Plus I have no leverage. Oh well, I'll test it out once I get it put back together. They're all easy to, it's easy to shift them down just because, you know, everything is seated down. When I push up, you know, the gear train wants to lift up with it, so it won't go in. So I'm going to clean all the surfaces of a brake cleaner, put the right sealant, that red sealant, that forward red sealant on it, and then lock it back up, and then it'll be ready to go in. Okay, so on this, I'm also going to be redoing the input shaft seal. It does take a special tool, but all I did is I went to the hardware store and I took my calipers with me, and I went through a washer bin that, you know, a washer that kind of fit the seal like that, and I measured the distance that this was in the hole, because there's no lip in there for this to stop on, so you could just keep on pushing up to this input shaft bearing. So it sits in there recessed, but there's nothing to physically stop it. So that's why you need a special installer tool with a flange here, and this basically sets the depth. So I was able to find a washer by just going through this bin of washers, because the thickness of the washers in the bin, they weren't consistent. So I found one that was the distance that this was inserted into this hole, and that's 3.5 millimeters. So I found a 3.5 millimeter washer. That's the thickness. You could even drill this out to fit over the shaft if you had to, or you could split it in half and do one side at a time if the input shaft was in there. I'm just doing it without the input shaft in there right now just because it's easier. So I'm going to take the new seal, put some oil around it, some transmission oil in it. If you buy the Ford one, it comes with a little bit of grease in there, so you don't need to pre-grease it. And these aren't pressed in very hard. I'm going to get it started with a nice seal driver. And you see now it's flush. And now I'm going to use this washer. Sorry, it's hard to do this and film at the same time. The reason why I had it up like that was because there was the funnels are right here, and so don't want to damage those. Alright, I think we're in there evenly now. There we go. And this top washer stops it from going in further. And it does it evenly. So, neat trick. I just super glued it. That's all you have to do. Otherwise, there is a special tool for this, and depending on when you can catch them, you might be able to get them for $10, or you might be paying $200. Alright, so that's all finished, and now I'm going to prep the surfaces to put the two halves together. So here I got the gasket maker. This is that red stuff, that Ford red stuff. It's kind of pricey. It comes in a little tube, but this stuff will not let this transmission leak. You want to make sure that you get it all the way around. Doesn't really matter if you get it on this side of the bolt hole because there's no oil passing through these holes. But you want to make sure you get it in one complete line on the inside of the bolt holes. And then once you got that, you're going to get your transmission bell housing. In play docking. And then that is on. So we put that tape on the splines on in here so that it wouldn't damage that input shaft's seal, because these gears are sharp. Alright, I'm going to bolt this all on now and torque it up. This is the shifter. You'll need some of this thread lock and sealer. There are 3 bolt holes here that go into the case, and if you don't seal them, the threads, oil will seep up through the bolts. And then for the base here, you're using the same red gasket maker. So here's the shifter. If you guys want to see something cool, if you ever wonder where the shift pattern comes from, in here you can see the H pattern, and that's what's following along, which is what's stopping your shifts. Alright, so this can only go in one way. You take these two lugs and you should have a straight shot. Should make looks like a candle to me. If you take a look in there, that's what it looks like when it's in neutral. They're all lined up. And the lugs just fit right down through the center. Okay. One of the things I forgot to mention when we're putting the cases together is make sure you don't forget your magnet. Clean it off. You don't have to grease it because it is captured by the bell housing. Whoop, got a little bit excited there. Speed this up. And one more. You just tighten these in a crisscross. Evenly. There we go. This transmission is sealed back up. Alright, I'm going to run through the gears. I'll show you that everything is fully functional. Let me just get the tape off this input shaft and then show you what that looks like. Alright, here we are. So I'm using the clutch disc just as a lever so I can turn it. Transmission is in neutral right now. You can hear the clicking in there. That's just the Synchros bouncing back and forth off the sliders. That's completely normal. Everything should move freely in neutral. When this lever isn't pushed back or forward, that means you're basically in the center, you're in neutral. That means if this goes forward or backwards, you're going to go from third to fourth. So forward is third, backward is fourth. I can tell by how it gets harder to turn. Back to neutral. If you want to go to fifth and sixth, go forward. Should get harder to turn. Now it's in fifth. Back to neutral. All the way back. Forward is reverse. And you can verify that by looking at the differential. I'm turning clockwise and it's turning counterclockwise. Alright, first and second, a little bit tricky. You don't go back all the way, you go back kind of in the middle. It should be really easy to turn. Then you hold that there. Back to neutral. Everything feels good. That the rattle that you hear when you're in a gear, that's completely normal. That's just the gears, unloading and loading. That's one of the reasons why you get a gear rattle with a lightweight flywheel, because the heavy massive flywheel with the dual mass springs absorbs the firing impulses of the engine. Without that, that's basically what you're hearing with a gear rattle. It's not as bad as this that I'm doing it, because I'm moving the gear train back and forth a lot. It's a lot more subtle. Kind of sounds like an exhaust leak at idle to 1200 RPM. Everything spins good. Clutches or the Synchros engage very nicely. Spins in neutral. It gets ready to go back in. So here we are. I got the transmission back in. This transmission is just really hard to get back up into this position, because this flywheel sticks out so much that this subframe just gets in the way. So what I ended up doing is I dropped the subframe, and I just had a ton more room to deal with getting this transmission back up in there. I'm working by myself, so that's what I did to make it easy on myself. If I had a friend here, we could just lift this thing up in here and put it in a matter of seconds. But because it was just me, I decided to drop the subframe, which it doesn't take that long to get out. Maybe 15 minutes. Then I just supported the steering shaft with a jack. But other than that, I'm gonna put some fluids in it now, and then reconnect all the piping, get the drive shaft in, basically get it ready, get enough parts on it to where I can start it, make sure that there's nothing wrong with it. The other thing I'll show you guys is how to bleed this clutch. This clutch it is self-bleeding, but you want to make sure that it at least disengages the clutch enough. Over time, the air will work itself out of the system. So if you have a soft pedal, it's not the end of the world for you. So I'm gonna get it filled up with oil. The oil just goes in here. It's level, kind of level with the plug, and then I put some Loctite on this one to help seal it, to make sure it doesn't leak. Let's see, I think that's about it. All right, let me get back to work. So here's the setup I have for bleeding the clutch. I'm power bleeding it. So there's a special adapter here, and it comes down here to a pressure tank. They sell pretty, they're not too expensive. Alternatively, you would have to have someone depress the clutch, and you can't really do it with your foot. You have to, because you got to hold it with your hand, because otherwise you're just going to fall to the floor. And you hook up a hose here, and it really helps to have a one-way valve. And then I got a can way down there to catch it all. So you loosen this little plastic nut here. You don't have to loosen it much. If you go out a 1/4 inch, that's way too much. An 1/8 of an inch gap between this one and this one. If nothing's coming out, that means it's just clogged with some clutch disc material. So what happens is the clutch, wears, and it creates that dust, like brake dust. And the throwout bearing, it's constantly going in and out, and there's a seal on that. And that dust just gets put into the brake fluid. So that's why, when you go to look at your brake fluid, there'll be some black stuff in there. That's just clutch dust. That's worked its way in the system. So it gets, what I've noticed, it gets built up in this end right here. And, all you have to do is basically just blow air into it. Not like shop air, very mild air, like just, you know, stick a hose on it and use your mouth to push that stuff out of the way, because the clutch pedal won't have enough pressure to actually push that out. Unless you use a pressure bleeder, then it should have no problem. So I'm going to do that. One of the ways that you get some of the air out of the system too is you just move the clutch pedal back and forth really fast, and then that should cause it to break up those bubbles and get them out. After you do it this way, you should have a pretty firm pedal. If you do it the manual way, where you're opening and closing it, that could take quite a while. Make sure your brake fluid reservoir doesn't run dry. You'll need 2 people for that, unless you have one of those one-way valves. And even after you do that, you're probably still going to have air in your system, which is okay as long as the clutch is fully disengaging. And what will happen is it'll bleed the rest of the air out of the system automatically as you use the clutch pedal. It's self-bleeding, but it can take a while to get those air bubbles as they'll work their way basically back up into the brake reservoir. So I'm going to take care of this. So here we are a few months later. Everything's well broken in. Transmission shifts just beautifully. I got a short throw shifter put on it, and it takes like no effort at all, as you can see, to shift it. I highly recommend doing this. Like even downshifts are smoother. Just wants to go into gear effortlessly. One of the things I'd say about bleeding the clutch is I went back and did it again. Instead of bleeding from the top, I reverse bled it from the bleeder, and that got some extra air out, which helped a lot with the disengagement of the clutch. Even going in the first, it just wants to go in effortlessly. Here we are at a stoplight, and it just wants to move. High-speed shifts are a lot better at the high RPM, less missed shifts. If you can do this upgrade,